Do you wake up every day fired up to make a difference? Are you committed to taking your nonprofit to the next level and beyond? I have news for you. Success isn't about hard work or passion. It's about having a smart, scalable strategy in place. Hi, I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. You may know me as the CEO of Charity Auction Today and Donor Books, or the author of The $1 Million Nonprofit. What I help nonprofits achieve that give them a significant edge and a clear path to substantial growth is the ability to strategically fundraise and effectively engage their community. And that's what I'm going to share with you right here on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. In each episode, I'm going to take you behind the scenes to reveal the strategies, techniques, and tactics of successful nonprofits so that you can put these into practice immediately to grow your organization. No matter if we are talking about common pitfalls nonprofits make and how to avoid them, exploring how to accelerate your next fundraising campaign, looking at how to attract ideal donors, or everything in between, this conversation is designed to drive your nonprofit forward. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Welcome back to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. Today, we're diving into how TechSoup is helping nonprofits overcome challenges and boost organizational efficiency. It's not just about dealing with issues as they arise. It's about leveraging the right tools and support to streamline your nonprofit's operations and empower your team to focus on what really matters, your mission. To guide us through this, we're joined by Jason Long, a seasoned IT expert who has over the past decade helped hundreds of small to medium-sized nonprofits access enterprise-quality IT solutions that are both effective and budget-friendly. Jason, welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast.
Thanks, Tom, for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this.
Awesome. Well, hey, let's dive right in. And can you explain exactly what is TechSoup and how does it support nonprofits?
Yeah, TechSoup is another nonprofit. So they are the clearinghouse for large IT vendors like Microsoft, Google, Adobe, Cisco. Those companies use TechSoup to vet nonprofits to make sure the nonprofits qualify. They are not a membership association, political affiliated organization. Once they're qualified and vetted by TechSoup, then that opens up the door for a lot of free licensing, discounted services. Perfect example of the licensing would be Microsoft email licensing. That if you have email, whether it's Microsoft or Google, you're paying for it somewhere. Through TechSoup, you can get a lot of that for free or next to free.
Today's episode is brought to you by Charity Auctions Today, the ultimate platform for hosting successful charity auctions online or in person. With their easy-to-use software, you can raise more money, reach more donors, and make a bigger impact. Whether you're running a silent auction, a live event, or a virtual fundraiser, Charity Auctions Today has everything you need to maximize your results without all the hassle. Join over 250,000 organizations that have raised millions with their powerful auction tools. Ready to level up your fundraising? Visit charityauctionstoday.com right now to get started for free. What are some of the other popular resources that TechSoup provides different nonprofits?
So they always have refurbished devices. Their refurbished devices are extremely discounted. We work with a ton of nonprofits and have tried different ways for low-use workstations that are extremely inexpensive. A lot of times their use case might be a residential housing facility where they're almost like a group internet platform. Those devices just need to access the internet. So the use case is going to be one where the organization wants to spend very little money for those. So a refurbished device is perfect. And TechSoup does a really good job of having a large amount of inventory of refurbished devices.
And so to get some of these refurbished devices or even some of the services they offer, what are the qualifications? Is it just 501c3 status? Is it tax exempt status? Both?
No, it's just that they're a nonprofit. It can't be a membership association. So if you and I, Tom, started a Ferrari club, and as the two members of the Ferrari club, we both got to have Ferraris first, I guess, to join that club. But that's a group membership that wouldn't qualify. If there's a political affiliated organization, that also would not qualify. Schools of higher education or private schools, they also don't qualify. Pretty much everything else does in the United States. So it's really just membership associations, political affiliations. Those are the two big, and private schools are the really big kind of barriers to acceptance into TechSoup.
I've talked to hundreds of nonprofits, and I've never heard of one of them going out to a service like TechSoup and even asking for like equipment or computers or refurbished devices to run their organization. I think it's a brilliant way to kind of utilize every resource you can to get as much free equipment as possible to really kind of support the mission. I think it's a great tip that a lot of people probably don't know much about unless you're one of the big organizations.
And there's so many perfect use cases. There's a lot of use cases where I wouldn't recommend refurbished devices, but I'll give you a perfect example of one. We have this recent organization. It's an after school program for at-risk youth to train them in a kind of a sports mentality. The nonprofit executive director played sports all his life, went to college, played sports in college, and believes in that regimented kind of structure for young at-risk children. So what they do as part of this after school program is help them with their schoolwork, help them with resumes, help them apply for jobs. So they need just internet machines. These will never be connected to the organization's production environment. So they're not going to have the nonprofit's email, really just an internet device. And some of these at-risk youth don't have that at their house. They don't have phones. They don't have another resource. And the public libraries, especially if you go back a few years ago, they were closed or they have odd hours. So this place found a perfect use for these kind of refurbished devices. They're great for that kind of use case.
Yeah, those are the little things that not too many people think about, but it would make a huge impact on being able to save as much money as possible for your overhead. I always try to teach nonprofits to, try to run as lean as possible. And this is just another way of being able to get the equipment you need for some of those low end, devices that just need the internet access to kind of get in there, very cost effective and be able to do its job. What are some other types of free licenses that are available through TechSoup?
So every year, and this is through TechSoup as it's from Microsoft, but through TechSoup, they get free Azure credits. So Azure, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of this, but what Azure is, it's Microsoft name for their cloud environment. So how this comes into play, small nonprofits will in the past have had servers or on-premise servers where that sits in an office somewhere in their office or wherever. Some nonprofits, when it's time to replace those devices, they can either spend a ton of money replacing them with physical hardware or move to the cloud. Microsoft's cloud version, Azure, provides you, it's now up to $2,500 a year in credits. So organizations that are small, say under 30 users, could more than likely fit their needs without paying anything for an annual basis. That resets on an annual basis. So they could have files saved up there. They could have any of their authentication methods, nerd IT stuff, any of their authentication domain controller stuff that sits on their servers in their office. They can move that up to Azure completely for free.
And if a nonprofit's interested in getting started with TechSoup, like what are some of the first steps that they need to take to just kind of get into that environment?
Super easy. If they just go to TechSoup.org, then there's a button that says Add Your Organization. It should be in the top right. They'll need to obviously have the tax ID and they have to be a registered person with that organization. So the domain needs to match. So if they're at xyz.org, the person requesting it needs to be from xyz.org. And then usually takes 2 to 3 days for someone from TechSoup to look at the organization, match it in something called GuideStar, which is a kind of a nonprofit database. And from there, they'll get all the paperwork that they need to accept terms and conditions. There's no cost or obligation. If you never use it, doesn't cost you a penny. If you do use their services, it's just a nice to have. But the labor, the lift of it is really, really low. It's a couple forms you fill out through their website.
And I know you've worked with hundreds of nonprofits and getting them started on TechSoup and managing as many of the free services as possible. What are some of your favorite tools that you personally recommend to nonprofits that you're working with when signing up with TechSoup?
So they do a good job at awareness. So awareness for IT trends, understanding of policy, so real base level policy stuff. So organizations, it doesn't always come into play when you're really small that you might need a technology use policy. And you may not need it when you have 3, 4, 5 employees. Everyone just kind of, it's your cousin, it's someone you worked with for a while. But once you scale and you have more than the amount of people that could fit in your office, then policy and procedure becomes kind of a bigger concern for an organization, setting those ground rules for everyone to follow. And TechSoup has a good platform for free guidance on policies like technology use policies and awareness on trends for small nonprofits, what they should be looking for in the industry.
And what are some of the major issues you see in nonprofits from an IT standpoint when you're working with them? Like what are the things that some of these nonprofits, they've grown from what I call the startup phase to now they're starting to build their mission, they're starting to grow their nonprofit. What are some of those things that you see them not doing that they need to start implementing? And at what stage do you think, kind of having somebody, an IT expert come in and some of these security tools come into play?
Earlier the better. And a lot of it, and I'm an IT person, so I'm somewhat biased, but earlier the better. People get caught up in IT, especially when you start introducing cybersecurity and the scary stuff that's out there with ransomware, and you see it in the news almost every single day. But it's easy to get caught up in the AI and advanced cyber detection and all these really fancy terms. But it's really the policy and procedures that are the most frequently missed. When a user leaves the company, what specifically do we remove their access from? Do we have a documented list? Because if you do that in a hurry, everyone's in a hurry in a nonprofit. You're wearing so many different hats. If you don't have those processes documented, fully documented, where people are and adhered to, then inevitably you're going to miss one of those boxes that needs to be checked. And it only takes one box that's missed for a cyber criminal to do something nefarious or an employee to mistakenly do something. It's rarely the big missing piece, like the missing front door of an office. It's the lack of a standardization and process that organizations really need to adhere to. So that's the first thing I always recommend is policy and procedure, stuff like acceptable use policy, onboarding users. What are we onboarding users? What specifically software, what kind of hardware, how are we tracking that? And then doing the opposite, when we remove employees, what specific permissions are we removing so we're not leaving anything unprotected once an employee leaves? That's that foundation that's great at 5 employees, but is mission killing at 1,000 employees, 500 employees, 1,000 employees. If you don't have that in place, it's going to really burden your organization and leave you open and vulnerable to a lot of potential attacks.
Are there any, when it comes to like IT and cybersecurity and all the security risk that comes around just our environment throughout the world these days, we get so many spam emails. And when you're dealing with volunteers and you're dealing with, different nonprofits that, they might not have the business mindset to think about some of these security issues when it comes through email with some of their employees or some of their volunteers. What are some of the horror stories that you have kind of run into that, some small nonprofits listening today can kind of use to kind of take their IT system seriously?
Yeah, a great example is there's a senior dog nonprofit that's based in Pennsylvania. It was a labor of love. It's a husband and wife. They retired They have a few acres of land, and they decided they wanted to have a senior dog sanctuary. It's small amount of revenue, volunteer driven. Their big fundraising event that they have every single year. It's called the Senior Dog Prom. It's adorable. They have dogs dressed up. They'll have one dog dressed up in a suit, another dog dressed up in a dress, and they'll take pictures and have it on a calendar, and that generates the money that needed to feed and take care of the animals. Real small amount of revenue. You're looking at $100,000-$200,000 a year. Really small. Well, they ran it just like a small organization, and they got hit with we hear it all day long. We hear that the ransomware, and you hear those giant numbers that these ransomware criminals are looking for. They want $50 million for a casino. I think MGM paid $50 million to get someone get access back to their network. You hear that when United Healthcare paid a lot of money. But you don't hear the stories like this. The Senior Dog Sanctuary, they were hit with ransomware, and the cyber criminals now are sophisticated enough to know the size of the nonprofit that they're working with. So if they hit this nonprofit with $50 million, they might as well have said $1 trillion. There's no possible way. But they hit this nonprofit with $1,200. It was actually $1,200 and some dollars and some change. Where they came up with the number, maybe there's an algorithm based on the amount of money that this nonprofit generates, or they perceive this nonprofit to generate. So it was $1,200 and some dollars, and they're like, well, we're just not going to pay it. They didn't pay it, and they lost all their files. They never got them back, and luckily they didn't have super mission critical data, but it was still just it feels like being robbed, someone taking something from you. But it's not the large amounts that really people should be scared about. Those are ones you hear about. It's the $1,200, the $3,000 cyber attacks that are easier on the nonprofits because they have smaller budgets. They don't have 15 people on a cybersecurity team protecting their organization. They lots of times have no one protecting their organization. So they're much easier targets, and you can attack a lot more of those with a lower risk of getting caught than you would maybe a bank or a giant healthcare system. So it's these small nonprofits that are really at a critical point, whether to invest a tiny bit in security procedures and maybe a tiny bit of security software to prevent these type of things.
Well, imagine waking up tomorrow and you've lost every single one of your donor records. What would you do? It's like a for-profit business losing all of its intellectual property. The donor list is the lifeblood of a small nonprofit. And if you lose that donor list and all the contacts that you have, it's very hard to recoup that. So,
Absolutely.
Having something in place to think about that today, so that you can wake up tomorrow and have that safety net or that security, knowing that, hey, it's going to be a lot harder to, take over any type of cybersecurity or cyber crimes, take over my organization by just having something in place. And a lot of these tools nowadays, they're not very expensive, are they?
No, they're extremely inexpensive. And a lot of it is, if in that scenario of that Senior Dog Sanctuary, if they would have just had some form of backups, they could have told the cyber criminal, no, we're not interested, and had them remove all the files, and they would still have them available to restore from backups. And you're looking at a couple $100 a year for the amount of data that they had. So we're not looking at a lot of money. It's just the know-how in a lot of these situations, how to prevent yourself from being a larger target than you probably should be.
And when it comes to, implementing data backups and, kind of protecting the files and everything, a lot of small nonprofits, they don't have much. They have a Google file or a OneDrive folder. And that's really as sophisticated as they get. When it comes to, smaller nonprofits that don't have these big enterprise type expensive systems, Is something like this easy to implement for them, for just having like a Google Drive folder or a Microsoft OneDrive folder, cloud storage,
Yeah,
that can protect them if they're just using
absolutely.
Google spreadsheets?
Google and Microsoft both. So for Google Drive and Sites, and then on the Microsoft side, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, both Google and Microsoft both do the same thing. They back up those environments for 30 days. Outside of 30 days, they do what they call a co-managed approach. They both use the same term. It's almost like they came together and invented this term called co-managed, or what that means is they carry the burden for the first 30 days. So say an employee leaves and you realize 15 days down the road that holy smokes, they deleted some stuff that we absolutely need. You can get that back. It's restorable within that 30 days. But if that same scenario happens and you don't figure it out for 6 months because it's a grant that comes around every 6 months or every quarter, you're dead in the water. That information's gone because Microsoft, Google, doesn't matter which one you're on, they're only going to save it for 30 days. What Microsoft and Google both do is they recommend third-party backups, dirt cheap. They're in the neighborhood of like $3 a month per user. And there's a lot of variations on that. There's a ton of third-party backups, but it's really inexpensive. And that would back up indefinitely both the email account and the file storage account for users.
Now, if a cyber criminal came into your nonprofit and basically took over your files or planted a virus or some malware, do you get, or does the nonprofit or does that cybersecurity criminal usually notify the nonprofit immediately, like, hey, I got access, or do they linger and wait?
Yeah, that's the one. The more often than not, what an ideal scenario for them is they're going to get in there and do a couple different things. It's almost counterintuitive. One of the first things they do is actually improve security. It sounds kind of weird, but they'll improve security because they don't want to be bumped out by another cyber criminal. So they want to, or leave holes that are so gaping that it makes people take action when correcting the problem. So that's kind of a weird one. It's a little bit counterintuitive. But the next mode is that they want to understand the organization. They want to figure out, is this someone that we're going to try, like that Senior Dog Sanctuary, we're going to try and attack them for ransomware for a small amount? Or is this a different kind of play where we can impersonate by understanding the way that the executive director or CFO speaks and relays information in emails? If we just hang out and just watch for a little bit, then we can maybe spoof them, pretend to be that person, and ask for, hey, instead of sending my payroll, I'm changing my bank. When you send payroll this week, can you send it to here? And they do that for a few different people, and it could be a lot of money. We had kind of in a similar, we got called in for a large nonprofit in Washington, D.C. The nature of their nonprofit, they send a lot of wire transfers. My business, we don't have any wire transfers. So if someone sent me an email, hey, can you wire, it's automatically fraud. And that's, I think, that the case for a lot of nonprofits, a lot of businesses in general. But this nonprofit, it's every day, the nature of their business, multiple wire transfers, tens of thousands of dollars each time. Well, one of them, just for whatever reason, got the hackles up of the controller who was actually asked to do it. It was sent by the CFO. She's like, this just doesn't feel right. It's the right email address. It's the right thing, but everything was legitimate. It just, the words, the turn of phrase was a little bit off. And she got out of her office, went down the hall, and sure enough, it was not that the CFO sending that information to send the wire transfer. It was over $50,000 that they were trying to get wired to some other place in another country. But that again fit with this nonprofit that does work in Europe and Africa. So it made sense that wire transfers were out of the country, but something with that turn of phrase, and that money would have been gone. So to your point, yeah, a lot of times what they'll do is figure out, well, how are we going to monetize this breach? Is it going to be impersonating an employee, a bunch of employees, or is it going to be the form of holding them hostage? And that's kind of the two veins you're really seeing a lot of right now.
Well, and that just scares the heck out of you because they could be in your system today. You wouldn't even realize it for maybe several months. And now, in the world of AI, that can basically read your emails, figure out your tone of voice, and be able to craft a new email in your voice and in your writing styles. It would make it very easy for them to craft an email to somebody and make it very believable. So yeah, that's
Absolutely.
amazing. What's the easiest thing a nonprofit can implement to basically immediately that will increase their cybersecurity today?
Multi-factor authentication. And I think this has gone a long way in the last probably 2 years. I'd say 30% of nonprofits that I was dealing with on that smaller side had multi-factor authentication. If you go back 2 years ago, now it's probably closer to like 60, 55, 60% are in that multi-factor authentication. But that's still a large gap between where it should be. And that's a zero cost kind of implementation that should be done right away. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with what multi-factor authentication is, it's your username and password. If someone were to steal that, you have username is a lot of times the email address, and then the password, if that's stolen from any of the tons of breaches that you see online, your cat's name, whatever it is, if you were to hand that password to the cyber criminal, they could access that account. With multi-factor authentication, it's that same thing, username and password, but there's another step that's usually an application on your phone asking for a 6-digit code. That would mean that the cyber criminal, to then get into the account, would have to know your username and password, have access to your phone, be able to turn it on and get that password. So it adds that extra layer. It's not impossible to breach, but you're looking at really crazy sophisticated level of cyber criminal at that point that most nonprofits on the smaller side are not going to be facing.
Hmm. Now, you work with a lot of nonprofits and you help them implement and find the free tools with TechSoup and then do a lot of IT support, a lot of cybersecurity implementation. How can nonprofits listening today find out more about your services and really kind of get in contact with you to kind of get a quick run through of maybe their system and what possibly needs to be improved or implemented?
Yeah, that great question. So from LinkedIn, I think we'll have the um, path later on, but also from our website. If you go to our website, www.takenoquarter.com, you can contact us from there. Since we're exclusive to nonprofits, we work with a lot of kind of up and coming and small emerging nonprofits. So a lot of what we do is providing guidance and the orientation that we always have. And I think the only way you can really work with nonprofits is really that get to get mentality of not everything needs to be gated behind an invoice. You know, a lot of what we do is free advice and, hey, here's what you need to do. Whether you ever want us to do it for you or we hold your hand as you do it, we're okay with any method. So we provide a lot of free guidance, and that's just how we like to operate. We want to do good for the community.
Well, that's amazing. Well, we learned a lot today, and there's just so much that with in the nonprofit space, thinking about IT and IT support and IT security is like an afterthought. No one really thinks about that. They're worried about building their organizations, growing them, finding the next donor, the next partner. And IT is probably one of the last services that they implement, right? Until you get to a certain level, or until it's too late and you get hit with a ransomware or you get hit with a breach and an attack. So, Jason, this has been a great conversation today. I hope everybody listening will, reach out to you, find out some more information. Definitely make sure that it doesn't matter how small you are, if you are 1 or 2 users or 50 users in your organization, thinking about implementing IT solutions and cybersecurity is definitely a must. Also reach out to TechSoup, set up an account, try to buy some refurbished equipment, and then, start implementing backups. That was probably the number one tip today is just start implementing backups and two-factor authentication on all of your devices. And then for the more deeper dive and more technical stuff, Jason's definitely your man to kind of help you out there. So Jason, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. Your expertise was amazing today, and I hope everybody listening starts to implement some of these security issues right away.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom.
Before we wrap up, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Charity Auctions Today. If you're looking to boost your fundraising with an easy-to-use auction tool, they've got you covered. From silent auctions to live events, they help you reach more donors and raise more money for your cause. Ready to take your nonprofit to the next level? Head over to charityauctionstoday.com to learn more and get started for free. Thanks again to Charity Auctions Today for sponsoring the show, and thank you again for listening to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. You're here. That means you're ready to take your nonprofit to the next level and make a greater impact. Come visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks to download free playbooks that your nonprofit can use today to start scaling to $1 million in donations. Plus, so much more. Catch the new behind-the-scenes insights on the next episode, and until then, here's to the impact you will make. I'm Tom Kelly. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and encourage others to listen.